This is pros and cons of state propositions. We have 11 propositions to go through. Quite a few less than we had in the 2 years ago, and Marilyn and I are thankful for that. So, also, if you like public speaking, if you were a school teacher, you could be doing this also. One of the advantages is that Marilyn and I are among, there's probably no more than 6 other people in Monterey County who are now more knowledgeable about all the propositions than we are. So you can astonish your friends with the depth of your knowledge. All right, next. Okay, this is our presentation that we did to outside groups, and this is our plug for the league. Next. Okay, what are propositions? They're presented to the public. They can make new laws, change existing laws, or amend the California Constitution. Next. They're put on the ballot either by the legislature. There are some things that have to go before the voters, like bond measures. So the legislature develops those. They also have the option of putting other issues, maybe ones they want to skirt on the ballot for the people to decide. And then the one that's most known is that by gathering enough signatures, you can put your own measure on the ballot. So that's by initiative. Next. Oh, and I should also mention that sometimes the ballot measures require more than 50% to pass, but all of them that are on the November election only require 50% plus 1 to pass. Just to give you an idea of what the quantities are, the California budget is $201 billion. The general fund, which is the funds that are can be assigned to different tasks by the legislature, is $139 billion. The special funds are earmarked things like fees and such, or revenue streams that are dedicated to some specific purpose. These are outside of the give and take of the legislature, and that's 58 billion. And then the bonds that are sold and the money that comes in from those averages, about $4 billion. Another type, okay, those, I've forgotten whether I did that or not. No, okay. There's 2 types of bonds based on the way that they're repaid. We have revenue bonds, which means that usually it's for some benefit, like electrical generation or a dam built to irrigate a certain area. And the bonds are repaid by fees paid by the beneficiaries. On the other hand, we have general obligation bonds. This is where the state of California pledges to take from that general fund the money to repay the bonds. So it's being backed by the full faith and credit of the state of California. Next. General obligation bonds are sold to investors. That repayments usually around 35 to 40 years. A rule of thumb at this point with what interest rates are, it's roughly twice what the bonds sell for. It's how much you have to repay over the life of the bond. One reason that they use bonds is sometimes something needs to be built now, and that way you get a large chunk of money and you pay it off as you go. Another one is the theory that, let's say we're building a road, that people 15 years from now are going to be helping to pay it back, and they're also getting the use of the road. Next. To give you an idea of what the magnitude we're talking about, California has $83 billion of general obligation bonds outstanding. The interest payments, interest and principal run about $6 billion. And oftentimes there are bonds that are authorized but have not been issued because circumstances are not right, or they haven't, or the need is not as pressing as they thought. And so there's still $39 billion worth of bonds that could be sold. Next. For each proposition, this is what we're going to talk about. The way that things are now, what the proposition would do, the effect on the California state budget, what a yes vote means, what a no vote means. Unlike other elections, it's pretty straightforward what yes and no means. Sometimes people who put initiatives on the ballot will try to play around with the wording so that you're not quite sure what a yes or no means. Then we have the arguments for and the arguments against. We think it's more interesting to see who puts up the money versus who signs the ballot measures. So you can read who signs the ballot measures, but what we'd like to look at is who's really funding it. Next. Okay, so Marilyn is going to do the odd-numbered propositions, and I'm going to do the even ones. So here is Marilyn.
Proposition 1 is a legislative statute. It was put on by the legislature, not by petitions being signed. And there's going to be about 100,000 homes and apartments built each year, and the state will provide assistance with grants or loans for low-income individuals. There is already about $2 billion per year from the federal government to California to help pay for houses. Next. It would permit the state to issue $4 billion in general obligation loans for low-income residents, housing near public transport, farm worker housing, CalVet loans for veterans. It's an expansion of some of what we are already doing. And it would provide 30,000 multifamily units, 7,500 farm worker households, and 3,000 home loans to veterans. This would provide $3 billion in general obligation bonds, $5.9 billion over a 35-year period with $170 million repayment per year. The others were talking about billions, we're now down to millions. And $1 billion for CalVet, the mortgage payments payoff bond. And, what does yes mean? Simple. It means they're going to sell $4 billion in general obligation bonds. No means they will not sell those bonds. The supporters say it provides direct relief for housing shortage by building affordable housing. It continues long-time commitments that we already have for veterans. And we need public investment for people to be able to buy houses. And we have $3.3 million so far donated to help pass this proposition. Chan Zuckerberg, $250,000, I can read. Cal Association of Realtors, $150,000. Essex Property Trust, Building Trades Council. Opponents say it will only help a limited number of people, so why do we bother? We don't need more debt. And one way to solve this is just to cut the onerous regulations or subsidize housing directly, give people checks if they need to buy a house. There are no donors who are saying no on Prop 1.
Take a couple questions.
Questions? Yes.
You know if the affordable housing will be built locally? In other words, will this money funnel down to local, or will these projects be state-run projects? How are they going to do affordable housing? Is there any?
It's all grants, so it comes down to the local agencies.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, next is Mary Ellen, Dick, and I were up in Aromas doing the pros and cons, and they had so many questions that we took 30 minutes on the first. But they're highly suspicious of government up there is the problem. All right.
Thank you for not getting me.
Yeah, okay. All right, next. Okay, mental health housing program, next.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Okay, in 2004, Prop 64 was passed, the Mental Health Services Act. And this is the act which took or added a surcharge income tax of 1% on incomes greater than $1 million. This was dedicated to mental health services through the counties. The money passed through to the counties. It generates about $1.5 billion to about $2 billion annually. It specially targets county assistance to people who do not have private health insurance. Next. Okay, in 2016, the legislature passed a bill that's called No Place Like Home Act, and this was to authorize $2 billion worth of bonds to build supportive housing for mentally ill people who were either homeless or in danger of being homeless. And they were going to repay these bonds by taking some of the money out of this money that was generated by the Mental Health Act. It turns out that there was some dispute about whether the legislature could do this. Some of the advocates said that this needed to go in front of the voters again. Next. What Prop 2 will do is settle this ambiguity. It will say that the state is authorized to issue these bonds, and that money can come from the Mental Health Services Fund, and the bond repayment is limited to $140 million out of that $1.5 billion to $2 billion that they bring in each year. Fiscal impact, because it's being paid by an existing revenue stream, there's no fiscal impact. Next. Yes means that the state will be authorized to issue the $2 billion worth of bonds, and that the repayment will take away some of the money that the counties have been receiving from the Mental Health Services Act. A no means that the bonds will not be sold, and all the money will continue to flow to the counties. Okay, next. The supporters say that this supportive housing, this is not just individual living places, but situations where people with mental illness live, and they have the support of health professionals and such. That this helps alleviate homelessness that's complicated by mental illness. Supportive housing is a step forward rather than just housing people. They're doing, it's part of a whole program. and it's going to be using funds that are already earmarked for mental health services. The donors are, again, Chan Zuckerberg. Everyone know who Chan Zuckerberg are. Zuckerberg, founder of Facebook, and Chan is his wife. We have California Association of Realtors. Essex Property is a builder, property manager. So, and the Construction Council. So people who would benefit from more construction plus Zuckerberg's personal interest. Those were just top ones, so that's why it doesn't add up to the total. Opponents say that it spends money on buildings instead of treatment, and that counties can already use the mental health services money for housing, although it's a pay-as-you-go, that if they need to save up to build a building, they would have to wait a few years before they could do that. Let's see, the opponents, the only listed opponent is a mental health group from Contra Costa, and their point of view is that don't, reduce the amount of money that we're getting for the services we want to provide. And there are no donations for a No on Prop 2 campaign. Bev, you want to move over? No, you're fine, okay. Let's see, Joe, you can edit that part out, thank you. All right, next. Okay. Questions?
On that one, because we have this wonderful agency here, Interim Incorporated, does anybody know what their position is on this?
No.
Know about Interim?
Does anybody know what Interim's position is on this?
That people know what Interim does. They house people with mental illness.
Right.
Yes.
I get fundraising letters from them.
Yes.
Okay. Question over here.
Who is it that would be administering this money that gets away from the county and goes to the state?
It would be, like most things, they would open it for application, and then different groups would apply for the money.
It wouldn't automatically all go to Los Angeles, for example?
That all depends on
Who applies?
who applies, right?
That's a number.
Okay, Robin.
Have the counties voiced their position on these?
Not that we know of. Let's see, the hair, I don't know who speaks for the county in situations like that, but nothing has been in the paper where they announce something one way or the other. Right. Yes, Sharon.
Do you know why the Contra Costa NAMI was against it, but the Mental Health America of California was for it?
Well, some people see, because part of this is that the state can raise money with these bonds at a cheaper interest rate than ordinary individuals or organizations, because the banks know that the state's good for it. So in some ways it's an advantage for this money to be raised by the state. And the counties feel like they'll apply for it, and they can use this for construction. Other people who are perhaps their housing needs aren't as great, but they really want to put a lot of money into treatment, don't want the amount of money that's available to be reduced by this bond repayment. Let's see, okay.
I've heard that in Utah they've done a program where they provided housing for people with mental illness, and that a lot of problems got solved as those people had housing. So it seems like in areas where there are homeless people and there are people with mental problems, that could be a plus to be able to access more money for housing.
Whitney.
Monterey Carroll recommends a yes vote. Just FYI.
Okay.
What counties feel they have their housing done?
That I do not know. Beverly, did you have?
Does this measure make more construction money available to the counties than would otherwise be available? It sounds like it's raising more money. So does it mean it would be more likely that counties could get enough money to do construction?
Okay, so when you sell the bonds, you get a big chunk of money right now. The counties can use money for housing, but they have, let's say if it's a couple of million, and they might have to wait a few years to accumulate enough money. So it's the difference between now and we would have to put money aside to do that. Anyways, yes, any more? Okay, thanks very much.
Prop 3 is another initiative statute that's put on by people signing petitions. And the way it is now, voters passed $4.4 billion of water bond in June 2018 and $7.5 billion in 2014. Both of those bonds were placed on the ballot by the legislature. Why do we need another bond? Well, for one thing, this was placed on the ballot by an initiative by organizations and individuals. Another reason people feel there aren't enough, particularly for there aren't enough water bonds. We don't have enough for long-term drought preparedness. What would Proposition 3 do? It would authorize $8.9 billion in general obligation bonds for water supply and quality, fish and wildlife habitat, upgrades to the Central Valley Canal and to the Oroville Dam. And there's a long list of organizations that would get money with varying degrees of varying amounts that I won't bore you with. It would also do groundwater recharge and storage projects, watershed land improvements, and most of the funds are grants to agencies that must provide matching funds. The fiscal impact of this is $17.3 billion repayment over 40 years, which would come out to $430 million per year. If you vote yes, you are authorized the state to sell these bonds to fund projects related to water. If you vote no, the state will not sell those bonds. The supporters say it will fund projects to help increase water supply. It will help disadvantaged communities by giving them access to safe drinking water, and watershed restoration will improve water quality. They received $4 million in donations from people like Ducks Unlimited, California Waterfall Association, and Western Growers. Proposition 3 opponents say, no, don't vote on this because the projects were not evaluated by the legislative process for cost and benefit. And there are too many specific projects for the Central Valley, Sacramento Bee, that's their argument. There's no cash donations that we know of against Proposition 3. Questions, Bev?
It's not a question, I just wanted to say, as you list the supporters and non-supporters, the League of Women Voters has taken positions on these ballot measures, and those positions are available on the League website, in the voter, and so forth. So if you're wondering where our own League stands on these, please look for that information.
And we haven't taken positions on every one of them, but you can find how we feel on those that we have studied enough to have a position on. Did I see another? Yes.
Do you happen to know what percentage of monies will go to farmers and in the Central Valley versus our local area?
No. I have a whole list here, but I didn't even look at it from that point of view, so.
Well, it does seem that farmers get the majority of our water at a lower cost than to the rest of us.
That I couldn't tell you. I'll look it up and see if, while he's doing the next one, see if I have a better answer for you. Yes?
Can you just tell us in a sentence or two why the League takes a no position on this?
No, because I didn't look to see how the league feels on any of these, so I didn't really know they took a no position on this. It must say in the voter why, or maybe it doesn't, I don't know. But no, I don't. These are pros and cons, so we're trying to be neutral.
Yes, Robin.
I just would like to remind all the league members and the public that there's the Voters Edge website that has detailed information about all the measures. So it's quite extensive.
It's gone out online this last week, I think. Was that copied?
Voters Edge.
Let's see, I'll ask for Robin to pass these out. These are a single sheet that have a lot of links to resources for voting, and that will include Voters Edge. Let's see, next. Okay, Prop 4, this has to do with children's hospitals bonds. Next. Children who have complex and chronic illnesses or health conditions can be treated under the California Children's Services Program. These services are provided primarily through 8 specialized private nonprofit children's hospitals and by 5 University of California hospitals. Over half of the child patients receive Medi-Cal benefits, which means that the hospitals get reimbursed at a very low rate. The bond proposition, the bonds are for capital improvements. These have come before the voters before in 2004 and 2008 and were passed both times. Only a small amount of the bond money remains, and so they've come to the voters for another bond measure. It authorizes $1.5 billion. Wow, well, you know, that's a pretty small number. Okay, I shouldn't. We could edit that out too, Joe. I shouldn't have said that. Okay, authorizes $1.5 billion in general obligation bonds to build new facilities. 72% of the funds will go to the 8 private nonprofits. That's about $135 million apiece, and 18% to the UCs and 10% to the other hospitals who treat children under this program, and they have to apply for the money. The hospitals themselves, as you know, are incredibly expensive things to run, so the hospitals will spend about $40 million a year on capital improvements. So this helps, but it's only a small part of the story. Just for, because people always wonder, what are these hospitals? And I've highlighted the one that's closest to us. That's the Lucille Packard Children's Hospital at Stanford. Next. And for the 5 UCs, the closest one to us is the UC San Francisco Children's Hospital in San Francisco. The fiscal impact is that about $3 billion will be paid over 35 years. $80 million per year in interest and principal, and it'll be paid from the general fund. Yes means that the state will issue this $1.5 billion bond to fund capital improvements at children's hospitals, and no means that the state will not. The supporters say that these specialized hospitals help 2 million children every year. Because the hospitals have to accept Medicaid at its low reimbursement rates, that they're not able to accumulate money or enough money for capital improvement. And that was next. Okay, who's funding this? Well, it turns out that all of the 8 private nonprofits decided they would get together, and everybody threw in the same amount. So their campaign is the 11 million, and everybody put in an equal amount. Next. The opponents say that California should not take on more debt, and why should we be supporting private hospitals? And no one has put up any money for a no on for a campaign. Questions? Yes, Sharon.
Do you know who Gary Wesley is?
Oh, who's Gary Wesley, who signed the voter information guide? Gary Wesley, for the last 40 years, has dedicated himself to the situation where if the legislature or somebody puts a bond measure on the ballot and nobody writes an opposition argument to it, he will write one. So that's what he does. It's, you know, there's great philosophical reasons why that's an important task, but that's who he is. Any other questions? Okay.
To answer your question back on number 3, whether it goes to farmers or where it goes, I looked at the long list I have, and it doesn't appear to go to individual farmers. It appears to go to a lot of different communities and organizations, but if you wanted to look at it, you certainly can. Yes?
One of the arguments against is that it shifts the cost for water from the end user to California taxpayers. So that is an argument put forth by the league.
Did you hear that?
No.
She says one of the arguments against Proposition 3 is that it changes the expense from the cost from end users to the state of California, to the taxpayers in the state of California, which is one of the lead's arguments against that.
But end users includes communities, doesn't it?
It does indeed. Yes, it does. But now we're on Proposition 5, which is a property tax rules for seniors. That might affect some of us. It's an initiative, constitutional amendment, and a statute. The way it is now, your property tax is based on the sales price, but there are exceptions. If you're over 55, or if you have a severe disability, or there's a natural disaster, you can replace your home of equal or lesser value as long as it's within the same county, and you can only do that once. Proposition 5 would expand your ability so that you can do it to a more expensive replacement and not have it assessed at the full rate. And your replacement home could be located anywhere in California as long as the county to which you want to move agrees.
No, it's anywhere. The county doesn't have to agree.
Well, what I read said that.
Oh, okay.
we better put our sources together. How interesting. And there's an exception available multiple times. Now you only get that exception once. Okay, Prop 5, the examples. A senior's principal residence has a tax-assessed value of $75,000. The house is sold for $600,000. A new house is bought for $500,000. The tax-assessed value of the new house would be $75,000 times 500 divided by 600,000, which would equal $62,500. Or a new house is bought for $700,000 and you end up with $175,000. The fiscal impact is on homeowners. 85,000 homeowners over 55 move yearly without this exemption. And local governments and schools lose $100,000 each year, and the loss could grow to $1 billion. Proposition 5, yes or no. A yes vote means the California Constitution is amended to grant certain homeowners tax relief. A no vote means there's no change to the current Prop 13 exemption. Supporters say older adults on fixed income and people with severe disabilities need this protections, and that by offering it, there'll be more houses available for younger families. The donors, California Association, even the National Association of Realtors. Opponents say local revenue for local services and schools will decrease. Loss of local revenue will become worse every year, and seniors already receive Prop 13 protection. And the Service Employees Union, International Union, has donated money. Well, they've donated most of the money for that. And just for your further information, the Orange County Register and the San Diego Union Tribune say yes. The San Francisco Chronicle, the Mercury News, the Press Democrat, and the Sacramento Bee all say no. So if you look at the Ballotpedia website, you can read their arguments for and against. Okay. Any questions? Yes.
Let's see, Diane.
I'm a little late with the question for Marilyn, but Marilyn, did you happen to know with the Proposition 13 exemption, is that only for people who purchased their houses before Proposition 13 was effective, or is it all seniors?
No. You have to have bought your house in 1975, 77 or
So
earlier.
that's only for people who purchased their house before a certain date. If a senior is in a house that they purchased
Last year, it doesn't.
78 or 78.
it doesn't affect
Is that
them.
right? No.
So all seniors are not protected. Okay.
Many are.
Thank you.
That's not true. Prop 13 has frozen the property tax at the value that your house had when you bought it.
Right, before.
No.
Anytime. No, because my house I bought when I was over 55, and I bought it in 2001, and its tax goes up every year.
Oh, they all go up every year. It's the valuation
But
of,
it's because the value of the house is.
No, it's not. I mean, I bought before, I'm protected by Prop 13, I bought in 74, and my tax goes up every year too, but it doesn't go up very much.
because the valuation, have not increased the valuation to what it would be worth now.
Exactly.
But if your next door neighbor buys the same house today, that neighbor will pay based on the value today, not back in 1977.
Diane, the limit is 2% every year that the county can reassess you.
It looks like we left more confusion.
The proposal gives a huge advantage, it seems to me, to people who need it least, and further exacerbates the inequalities and the problems that Prop 13 has caused for revenue for the state, most of that revenue going for education.
That's certainly one way to look at it. Yes.
I'll make a comment. I'm a realtor, so I know this inside and out. The way the state structures Proposition 13, eventually every property will turn over. So that means it will be reevaluated at the current marketing value. It doesn't stay that way forever. People seem to it stretches out the property tax increase over maybe 30 or 40 years. But at some point in time, every property will be reassessed at the new value.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yes.
It seems to me this would allow more flexibility in seniors. If you have a big house and your children have left, you don't have any incentive now to downsize. And what if you're near a school? So if you can do it more than once and you want a smaller house and then you have a paralysis and you need assisted living, this would be beneficial for older individuals.
Because you could do it more than once, and the other benefit is that you could do it in another county. You don't have to stay in Monterey County. So.
Okay, we better keep moving.
I think so.
Okay, Prop 6. Let's see. It eliminates certain transportation taxes and fees. Next. Okay, SB 1, which was a legislative bill, passed in 2017 and increased the fuel excise taxes by 12 cents for gasoline and 20 cents for diesel. Increased the diesel state sales tax, and it added a transportation improvement fee to all vehicles when you re-register. Next. In 2018, the state expects to raise $4.4 billion from these sources. Prop 69, which was approved in June, restricts the SB 1 revenues to transportation-related infrastructure. Next. Prior to 2017, the last fuel tax increase was approved in 1990 and went into effect in 1995. Next. What Prop 6 would do is repeal, basically, the fees and tax increases enacted by SB 1. It would amend the state constitution to require voter approval through a proposition for any future transportation taxes or fees. The fiscal impact, legislative analysts predicted that by 2020, the revenues dedicated to traffic infrastructure would be reduced by about $5 billion a year. I guess means that we're repealing the increases from SB 1 and that voter approval will be required for any future increases. A no will keep things as they are, and that the legislature can continue to impose taxes and fees with a 2/3 vote in each chamber. Next. Supporters say that gas taxes and registration fees are too high. They feel that 1/3 of the gas tax increase is being diverted to non-road uses, which actually means mass transit. And tax increases should be put before the voters. Next. All the support basically is coming from California Republican Party and their various members. One of the things to note about they're not taking out their personal checkbooks. They are allowed to use campaign funds that they raised for their own campaigns, and if you're in a safe district you don't really need, and they can parcel this out. Everybody does it. Gavin Newsom helped support a previous proposition using campaign funds. Opponents say, 89% of the counties have poor or at-risk roads, a lot of bridges and overpasses are unsafe, and the loss of funding will affect our transportation infrastructure. The people who are against it have raised an incredible amount of money, $31 million, and it's basically the top donors are those who would benefit from increased construction activity. So, any questions on that? Yes, sir.
Dennis, I've heard that a great deal of the state gasoline taxes over the years have been diverted to other items, and a lot of the state tax gasoline does not go for roads or maintenance. Is that true?
It was true until Prop 69 was passed. which forces the SB1 funds to go specifically to transportation related projects. There is some, well, people are trying to generate some controversy as to whether any of this money could go to the high-speed train. If you look through the projects that they say they're going to fund, nowhere does it say the high-speed train will be funded. Other people who have tried to read it another way notice that in Southern California, one of the rail authorities is being given money, and part of the charter is to look forward into the future. And they feel like that's an opening for the high-speed train, but most people don't read it that way. Okay, Beverly, you're going to be doing this next.
So you said a huge amount of money was raised, $31 million, but your top 3 donors gave a very small percentage. Could you give us some more information about who else?
I can only refer you to Ballotpedia, who consolidate this information. After the top few people, I stopped reading.
The great majority in this case, they were not.
Yeah. Let's see, way in the back.
Yeah, I was really surprised that you had said 1990 and 1995 for the last taxes.
Right.
I don't know, I know that gas price has gone up quite a bit. So how has that occurred for California if it isn't based on taxes? Or is it more local? Or
It's the cost of gasoline.
Just the cost of gas?
Right.
But I thought there were still taxes throughout the
year. The taxes that will go up and down are, there's a sales tax on gasoline, which is like 2%. But the excise taxes are not, they're fixed. And although this proposition, I should have mentioned it, does change the excise tax to a percentage of the gas. So it will be able to go up and down based on the cost of gasoline. Cost of gasoline is very volatile, so that's what you're seeing. Janet.
Because of greater efficiency in automobiles, the gas tax has over the years generated less and less sales tax revenue on the state level because of...
Right, Janet's pointing out that with the electric cars and hybrids and such, the less gasoline is being used per vehicle, and that the amount that's available for infrastructure was going down. That was one of the reasons for this new fee, like electric cars are getting a $100 registration surcharge because they don't pay for gasoline. I'm going to take one more question, and then, yes?
Just a quick summary statement. If you take a no vote on 5, does that leave all the money generated from gasoline sales for infrastructure, for our roads and bridges? Or does that mean that you still spend it on going to the moon or wherever else you want to go?
5? 6. 6. No. Let's see. The Prop 69 says no, you can't divert transportation funds anymore.
Okay, so how does that relate to 6?
Okay, so what 6 does is it says the increases that were put in place by SB1 are going to be rescinded.
Don't raise the tax on that.
If you don't want it to change, you vote no.
Raise stays for roads and road projects.
Correct. If you vote yes, it means that by 2020 there'll be $5 billion less available for roads. But roads are getting 2/3 and mass transit and others are getting about 1/3. If you vote no, then that money will remain available. Does that clarify it? Oh, okay. All right.
Is that it?
Okay, this is a fun one. This is a legislative statute. Right now, federal law requires that all states, if they have daylight savings time, it's between March and November. However, if the states don't want to have daylight savings time, they don't have to. They can have standard, which is why Hawaii and Arizona don't ever have daylight savings time. But you can't change to daylight savings time all the time. What Proposition 7 would do is it encourages the legislature to consider year-round daylight saving time. 2/3 vote of the legislature would be required to change the current law. And if the legislature did do it, then they'd have to get approval from the federal government. There's no direct fiscal impact. And Proposition 7 means, California legislature, would you please seek year-round daylight savings time? A no vote means we're happy with the way it is. The Proposition 7 supporters say, medical studies show that the risk of heart attacks and strokes increases during the days following a time change. And changing clocks twice a year increases our use of electricity by 4%. But nobody's donated any money to have us vote yes on 7. The opponents say having a different time than other Western states could create confusion. And there are no conclusive studies that having daylight savings time year-round saves energy or money. But again, nobody's put any money up to encourage you to vote no. And I looked for editorials, and I couldn't find any editorials supporting Prop 7, but the Monterey Herald and the Sacramento Bee are in opposition. Any questions?
Why?
Why what? Oh, mostly for the reasons that are up there. There are probably others, but I didn't write down any points that they might have made that weren't up there. Yes, Karen.
In terms of the confusion argument against it, many other states are now considering changing to permanent daylight savings time. And I thought some others already had it on their ballot as well.
Oh, they might, but I didn't find any of that.
I can't remember which, but there are several that also have it on the ballot, and several others who are about to work towards getting it on the ballot. So having a different time in different states isn't going to matter pretty soon.
Well, if they all approve it, you're right. But the argument against it now is really how confusing it would be if California had one time when Washington and Oregon had a different time, and then, and then you're dealing with, I'm trying to remember the arguments that I read against it. You're dealing with other businesses, other governments, other people around the world, and they'll be confused. Let's see, what time is it in California? Oh, it's this time in Oregon, but it's this time in California, and they get confused. That's the argument against it. I don't know if it's true, but that's what they say. Yes?
If you vote no, can the legislature go ahead and look at doing it anyway?
Sure they can. And they're the ones who put it on the ballot, so to me it's a confusing proposition. Daryl?
One other argument against daylight saving in winter hours is like children going to school and they have to go home to the house.
Yes.
About coming home?
It happened before, and children got killed waiting on the quarter bus on Los Corrales Grade in front of the house.
Yeah, there's pros and cons, as to whether you should always go to daylight saving time, because at different times of the year it's effective, at different times of year it isn't, depending on what you consider effective. Yes?
You said this was a legislative statute. Do we know who in particular was behind this?
No.
I mean, who came up with the idea?
I didn't see that in any, or if I did, I don't remember it. Okay, next one.
We got that, we'll look it up. Nobody, yeah, okay, thank you. It's in the Easy Voter Guide, or no, that's your voter information guide. Yeah, it's none of our local legislators. Okay, Prop 8. If you need to go, go ahead, because we are going to be running late. Prop 8 refers to how much money kidney dialysis clinics can make. There's 588 licensed dialysis clinics. Majority are privately owned by one of two companies, and their estimated annual income is $3 billion. Next. Let's see, most dialysis is paid by Medicare and Medi-Cal at a fixed rate close to the average cost of treatment, and private insurance negotiates rates, but they usually have to pay quite a bit more than the Medicare Medi-Cal rate. Prop 8 would require the clinic owner to rebate payers, mostly the private insurers. If annual corporate revenues are greater than 15% higher than the allowable costs of what they're calling direct patient care and quality improvements. And it would prohibit clinics from turning away patients based on who is paying for them. Estimated impact, nobody knows, because the terms allowable costs are going to have to be interpreted by regulatory agencies and probably the courts. Okay, next. Yes means that the clinics will be required to rebate money to the payers if their revenues exceed a cap of more than 15%, and no means no change in the current practices. Supporters say this provides incentives for clinics to lower their costs. Rather than rebate excess profits, they could potentially hire more healthcare workers, since that's compensated. When insurance companies charge less for dialysis, the overall cost of insurance will go down. The people who are supporting it, another big chunk of money, 34 million, SEIU, and another labor council. Opponents say that what's allowed to be counted in this cap doesn't cover the complete cost of running a clinic. For example, if you have regulatory compliance employees, they don't get to be counted. Security at the facility doesn't get counted. Less profitable clinics could reduce or close their operations. It's one union's attempt, one could guess which one, for leverage in attempting to unionize dialysis clinic employees. Spending against it is robust, and it's basically the two principal companies that own the dialysis clinics. Okay, any questions? All right. Wow. Thank you. Oh, that's right. That's right. 9 was taken out. That was that idea of dividing California into 3 parts. I actually think the reason that people didn't want to be concerned about dividing the state into 3 parts is that they didn't like the proposal of having Northern California, Southern California, and Monterey. And just think, Karen, you might be able to have gotten your city there if Monterey seceded. Yeah. Okay, Prop 10, local government and rent control. All right, by 1988, 14 communities in California had rent control ordinances. The courts, going all the way up to the Supreme Court, ruled that regardless of what rules you put on, that landlords have to be allowed allowed to raise rents enough to make a profit. In 1995, the state legislature passed the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act, which preempted certain aspects of local rent control. They limited the rent control of buildings that were first rented out prior to 1995, so all new construction is exempt from any local rent control. It excluded single-family dwellings, and that the landlords may raise rent to market rates when a tenant moves out. Okay. California, the way things are now, California renters pay 50% more than the national average. About 20% of Californians live in cities with some form of rent control. San Jose, San Francisco, Mountain View are around here. And more cities are seeking to establish rent control, although if you look at the history of the local measures, it's not a slam dunk. A lot of them were defeated. Let's see what Prop 10 would do. It repeals the Costa-Hawkins Rental Act, allows cities and counties to regulate rents on any type of rental housing, including new construction and single-family dwellings. And it doesn't change anybody's laws on, local laws on rent control. Prop 10 would not create new laws, and it retains the landlord's right to a fair return on their investment, because that was a Supreme Court case. Fiscal impact, difficult to predict because we don't know what the market and landlords and investors are going to do. People guess that landlords will reduce the amount of rental housing offered and various other things, but everybody's just guessing, and usually they guess based on their own backgrounds of what they're interested in. Next, let's see, impact, that's unknown, that's all unknown. Okay, it's the great unknown. Okay, yes, means that we're repealing Costa-Hawkins, and this will allow all communities to enact their own rental ordinances on all rental property. No vote means no change to current practices. Next, Prop 10 supporters say that the high cost of rent hurts seniors and people on low and fixed incomes, and it allows local communities to decide whatever makes sense for their own situation. The donors have been raised $14 million. The great bulk of it comes from the AIDS Healthcare Foundation. This is Michael Weinstein's organization, and you may be familiar with them. They've gotten very involved in initiative activities. There was one recent one they funded where they were going to fix California drug costs to whatever the VA paid. They did a recent one in LA that they were against what they called spot or zoning, and so they become more involved in the political process. Okay, opponents say rent control will reduce the available rental property, and that it's a disincentive for the construction of new rental property, what we would call multiple dwellings, apartments and such. The people who, let's see, are opposed to it have also raised a robust amount of money, and it's who you would think, the California Apartment Association, which is a trade organization of landlords, the realtors, and the Western National Group is a construction and management company of rental properties. Okay, so are there any questions on that? Janet?
Do you know if an enactment of a local rent control ordinance requires voter approval, or can it just be approved by the city council or board?
So the question is, if we want to have a local rent control, can it be done by just the council vote, or does it have to be a measure to be put in front of the, I have no idea. Let's see, former supervisor, no?
No.
No, okay, well.
My guess is that they could probably do it, but if they didn't, they would want to have a vote.
Well, Pacific Road did the STR program all just by council.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, the Stewards, I think, would be a whole different issue.
Okay. You can research that, Jan. Okay. Any other? Yeah, report back to us. Okay. One more question from anybody? Okay. Thank you.
Proposition 11 is another initiative statute. The way it is now, private ambulance personnel remain on call during unpaid work breaks. The California Supreme Court, though, in 2016 ruled that private security guards on unpaid breaks are off duty and uninterruptible. Also, ambulance personnel rules are similar to private security guards, and lawsuits have been filed seeking compensation for unpaid on-call breaks in the past. What would it do? It would amend the state labor laws for private ambulance personnel to remain on call during paid breaks, and it applies new on-call rules retroactively to current pending lawsuits. Fiscal impact. There are increased costs to ambulance contracts if the private security guard ruling is applied to private ambulance personnel. A yes vote allows private ambulance employees to remain on call during work breaks, and missed breaks are compensated. A yes vote exempts employers from liability for violations of existing laws regarding work breaks. A no vote means there's no change in the current practices, and the current pending lawsuits will move forward. So to say, it establishes into law the long-standing industry practice of paying medical personnel to be on call during their work breaks. And this, most of the money, all of the money supporting it has been raised by the AMR, the ambulance people. Prop 11 opponents say it nullifies lawsuits about past work rules infractions, but nobody has donated any money against Prop 11. I'll try to answer questions, but this one is confusing to me. Yes?
I have a son who's a local paramedic, and I was shocked when I read this because I said, well, you know, don't you get paid breaks? And he said, well, actually no, Mom, because we don't have breaks. There was no such thing as a break for a paramedic and EMT on call, because they may stop and try to eat if they have some downtime, but if there's a 911 call, they're out the door. So he said there's a lawsuit to compensate them for the fact that they have never had paid breaks. I mean, they have never had breaks where they really had breaks. He was saying we should vote no on it, but I read it and I think that we should vote yes because, for example, one of the ways that the ambulance companies would compensate for this would be to hire fewer paramedics and replace them with EMTs, and you do not want that. Paramedic has a lot more medical expertise and training than an EMT, so that's just my take on it.
And I forgot to mention that the Los Angeles Times, the Monterey Herald, and the Sacramento Bee are all in favor of this. The San Francisco Chronicle is against it.
Okay, that should be an interesting Thanksgiving dinner that you're Okay, Prop 12, farm animal cages. Just like the previous one, you kind of wonder, why isn't this being worked out in regulatory bodies and things like that? But it's on the ballot, and we have to be serious about it because it affects people's lives, and in this case, animals' lives. 2008, California voters approved Prop 2, which regulated the cages of egg-laying hens, pregnant pigs, and veal calves. Basically, we're talking about egg-laying hens because California doesn't produce very much veal or pork. It wasn't fully implemented until 2015. Now, though, there's a feeling that that proposition was too vague and it was difficult to enforce any standards on the industry, because the way it's written, it says must be enough space for the animal to stand up, must be enough space for the chicken to spread its wings, things like that. So what, next? So what Prop 12 would do is actually sets standards for how much space you need for these animals. And it also requires cage-free housing systems for the hens and requires any eggs coming in for sale from other states to be raised under the same circumstances. And most of the eggs in California are imported from other places. Now, when they say cage-free, it doesn't mean that these animals are running around like at Farmer McDonald's farm. And what it means that they're now just in these big groups of hens that are all clucking around and things like that. Okay, yeah, it would ban the sale if any producer selling in California would have to meet these requirements. Next. Fiscal impact, it's hard to say, although it's not very big. Maybe farm income will go down because of but definitely state enforcement has to go up. The people in Aromas told me there's hardly any enforcement now because the standards are too ambiguous, so the state will probably ramp up on this. And consumer prices are likely to rise as producers have to spend money on this new infrastructure for their animals. A yes vote, as we were talking about what it bans, and it will require new infrastructure among producers, and no change to current practices. 12, the supporters say that it strengthens and clarifies California's decade anti-cruelty laws regarding farm animals. It also reduces, because they're giving animals more space, it could reduce the risk of food poisoning and factory farm pollution by reducing overcrowding. The people who are supporting it, most of the, the 6 million, big chunk of it is from the Humane Society of the US, and then 2 animal rights activists have put in money. Prop 12, it says that there's no truly cruelty-free way of raising these farm animals. You know, in the end, we're going to eat them. So, and the 2022 compliance date is too soon, and agricultural regulation should be done in the legislature and regulatory agencies and not through a proposition. The opponents is the Humane Farming Action Fund, which is an interesting group because they oppose it because they feel that Prop 12 doesn't go far enough. And if you, if you also want to be amused, read the arguments for and against in your voter information guide, because evidently there's real bad blood between this group and the Humane Society, and they hurl charges of corruption and things like that against each other. And you're going, whoa, what is this? But anyways, that's why they're not against it for the usual reasons. Farmers have not put up any money against that. Okay, any questions? So if you're in Pacific Grove and you have chickens, you're going to have to conform to this. Yeah. All right, yes, Susan.
Actually, the thing about confining animals closely relates to water quality, because of the seepage of drownings and so forth.
Okay, so there was a remark that by having less crowded conditions, that there's less contribution to water pollution.
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and thank you to Marilyn, and you know, look at those links, because there's a lot of valuable information there.